He stood before the titans of industry, his voice a steady, confident current cutting through the pressurized silence of the boardroom. This was his element, his arena. The data flowed from him, irrefutable and elegant, painting a future so bright it was almost blinding. And then it happened. Not a tremor, but a cataclysmic failure of the dam he had so carefully constructed around his own biology. A scent, potent and sweet as forbidden fruit, erupted from his very being, a fragrant bomb that detonated in the sterile air. It was the scent of an omega, his scent. In the stunned silence that followed, every head in the room swiveled towards him, but he only saw one man. Joe Summers, his boss, the architect of this corporate empire and the author of the one unbreakable rule Ralph had just shattered. He watched as Chuck gave way to a dawning, horrifying comprehension on Joe's face, his storm gray eyes narrowing into shards of ice. In that single, frozen moment, Ralph knew his life was over. He wasn't just a subordinate in trouble, he was now the personal enemy of the most powerful alpha he had ever known. The air inside Joe Summers' Eurotrade's executive suite was a carefully curated atmosphere of dominance. It smelled of expensive leather, aged wood, and the faint, electric hum of ozone from a state-of-the-art air purifier. But underneath it all, weaving through the sterile perfection, was the scent of Joe himself, a sharp, commanding aroma of pure alpha power that spoke of thunderstorms and cold ambition. For 3 years, this scent had been a constant, perilous reality for Ralph, a high-wire act he performed every single day. His morning ritual was a precise, clandestine operation. Before the sun even thought about gracing the city skyline, Ralph would stand before his bathroom mirror, swallowing the chalky, bitter pills that suppressed his true nature. They were his armor, the chemical shield that allowed him to cloak his omega essence and present to the world the convincing, unassuming facade of a beater. It was the price of admission into the hallowed halls of Summers' corporate Eurotrade's upper echelon, a world where he could thrive. A world where he unequivocally belonged, if only by a thread of deception. Joe Summers wasn't just a CEO, he was a myth forged in the fires of corporate warfare. With dark hair perpetually swept back from a brow that seemed carved for intense thought and eyes the color of a gathering blizzard, he exuded an aura that demanded both unwavering loyalty and a healthy dose of primal fear. His charisma was a weapon, sharp and forged from steel, and his voice, a low baritone rumble, could either galvanize an army or cut a subordinate down to size with a single, devastating word. But beneath this impenetrable exterior of success, a deep and septic wound festered, a ghost from his past that had poisoned his present. This ghost had a name, and it was written into the very DNA of his company, a single, unyielding commandment etched into every employment contract. No omegas were permitted in the ranks of upper management. It wasn't just a policy, it was a scar, a fortress wall built around a broken heart. Into this fortress walked Ralph, a marketing prodigy whose mind was a finely tuned instrument, capable of divining the hidden desires of the masses and crafting campaigns that sang directly to the consumer soul. He had ascended the corporate ladder with a speed that was nothing short of meteoric. 3 years prior, he had been a recent graduate, armed with a meticulously engineered beater scent, a disarmingly placid smile, and a strategic intellect that operated at the velocity of light. His results were undeniable. He transformed moribund product lines into industry titans and translated Eurotrade's often gruff, abstract visions into strategies of breathtaking elegance and impact. By any and all metrics, Ralph had become utterly indispensable. More than that, he had become Eurotrade's right hand, his shadow, his most trusted lieutenant. Their professional dynamic was so seamless it bordered on the supernatural. Joe would voice a half-formed concept, a nebulous goal, and Ralph would somehow grasp its essence, distilling it, refining it, and executing it with a prescient precision that left everyone, including Joe, in a state of quiet awe. Their days were long, their nights even longer, fueled by gallons of black coffee and an unspoken, powerful current that crackled in the space between them. It was a gravitational pull both men felt, and both men consciously, desperately chose to ignore. For Ralph, their proximity was a constant, dangerous dance with fire. Every shared, lingering glance over a quarterly report, every fleeting moment their hands brushed while reaching for the same pen, sent a tiny, illicit shockwave through his rigorously controlled system. Eurostrade's alpha scent was a perpetual assault on his senses, sharp and intoxicating, a primal call that spoke of raw power and untamed potential. Deep within him, in the part of his biology he fought so hard to suppress, his omega instincts stirred, whispering a siren song of surrender. His logical mind would scream back, a frantic sentinel guarding the walls of his carefully constructed identity, demanding he maintain control at all costs. Joe, in turn, found himself increasingly captivated by the enigma that was Ralph. He was unlike any beater Joe had ever encountered. The others were competent, certainly reliable cogs in his corporate machine. But Ralph possessed a creative inferno, a quiet, smoldering intensity that Joe found both profoundly intriguing and deeply unsettling. He would often find his gaze drifting across the vast expanse of the boardroom table, watching the way Ralph Eurostrade's dark curls would fall across his forehead as he was lost in thought, or the subtle, electric spark that lit up his eyes the moment a brilliant idea struck. He rationalized it as mere professional admiration, an appreciation for a rare and exceptional talent. He had to. His history, his trauma, demanded it. That history was a specter that haunted Eurostrade's every waking moment, a story he never told but which was written in the bitter lines etched around his mouth and the frozen landscape of his eyes. The source of his pain was a betrayal so absolute, so devastating, it had nearly shattered him and his burgeoning empire. The traitor had been an omega, a breathtakingly beautiful, wickedly intelligent omega who had not only absconded with his companion Eurostrade's revolutionary nascent technology, but had also stolen the very concept of trust from Eurostrade's soul. She had left behind a gaping, bleeding wound and a crippling phobia of vulnerability. The omega clause in his companion Eurostrade's charter wasn't just a rule. It was the scar tissue that covered that wound. On a particular Tuesday, the atmosphere at Summers Corp was electric with a tension so thick you could almost taste it. The annual Q3 Global Performance Review was looming, a corporate event that was less a review and more a ritualistic bloodletting. Underperforming departments would be eviscerated, senior executives would be grilled without mercy, and the board of directors, a grim jury of stony-faced investors, would preside over it all. Billions of dollars hung in the balance. Careers would be forged in fire or shattered into dust. For weeks, Ralph had lived and breathed the marketing department's presentation. He had polished every slide until it gleamed, rehearsed every word until it flowed like poetry. His entire strategy, a daring and innovative plan for market penetration, rested on a delicate tightrope walk between hard data and gut intuition. The pressure was a physical weight on his shoulders. That morning, Eurostrade woken with a nebulous sense of unease, a fleeting ghost of a thought that something was amiss. but the tidal wave of adrenaline accompanying the impending presentation had washed it away completely. His mind, usually a fortress of organized thought, was now a laser, singularly focused on profit margins, growth projections, and the persuasive rhetoric needed to win the day. In his haste, he had bypassed breakfast, opting instead for an extra-large, extra-strong coffee as he dove into his final S. And there, on his bathroom counter, next to his toothbrush where they were always placed with ritualistic care, sat the small bottle of suppressants. A tiny, innocuous bottle, forgotten in the chaotic symphony of his morning rush, a single missed note that was about to bring the entire orchestra to a crashing, dissonant halt. Joe, equally consumed by the forthcoming review, was a storm of focused energy, barking orders with more than his usual clipped intensity. His alpha scent, typically a controlled, sharp fragrance, was now tinged with a frenetic, almost feral edge, the primal readiness of a predator preparing for battle. He stalked the halls of his office, a formidable force of nature, his gaze sweeping over his employees, a silent, unyielding demand for absolute perfection. The conference room, perched high in the glass and steel eyrie of the Summers Corp Tower, felt like a mausoleum, thick with hushed anticipation. The low hum of the air conditioning was the only sound accompanying the nervous rustling of papers and the occasional dry cough. Joe assumed his throne at the head of the immense mahogany table, his posture as rigid and unyielding as a marble statue, his face an unreadable mask. Ralph sat 2 seats away, the soft glow of his tablet illuminating his face, a thin, cool film of sweat coating his palms. The first few departmental presentations came and went in a monotonous blur of charts and graphs. The tension in the room ratcheted up with every passing slide. The board member Sayuro's strayed expressions flickered between bored detachment and hawk-like scrutiny. Finally, it was marketing Euro's trade's turn. Ralph took a slow, deep breath, straightened his tie, and rose to his feet. He began to speak, his voice a beacon of clarity and confidence, his genuine passion for the new strategy infusing his words with an infectious energy. He navigated the slides with practiced ease, presenting a compelling narrative backed by irrefutable data, painting a vivid and irresistible picture of the Campanier Euro's trade's future triumphs. He felt that familiar, intoxicating rush of being in his element, of holding the undivided attention of a room filled with power brokers. But then, he felt it, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift within him, a strange prickling sensation at the nape of his neck. A faint, insidious warmth began to spread through his limbs like a slow creeping fever. He mentally pushed it down, dismissing it as a manifestation of his nerves, the crushing weight of the moment. He pressed on, his voice remaining strong and unwavering. He was in the middle of a sentence, detailing the projected revenue streams for their groundbreaking new campaign, when the dam finally broke. It wasn't a gradual leak, it was a violent, explosive rupture. The carefully maintained beater scent he wore like a cloak Euros, a bland, neutral, forgettable aroma Euros, was utterly and completely annihilated. His body, in open rebellion against the missed dosage of suppressants, unleashed a tidal wave of pure, uncut omega. It wasn't a Euro's trade tea, a mere hint or a subtle suggestion. It was a fragrant flare, an undeniable, overwhelming, and catastrophic declaration of his true secondary gender. The very air in the room seemed to congeal, growing thick and heavy. Heads snapped up from their tablets and notebooks. The subtle, underlying sense of aggression and panic from the other alphas in the room, which Ralph had previously been oblivious to, now slammed into him like a physical force. From somewhere across the table, a low growl rumbled. Joe, who had been leaning back in his chair with a critical, appraising look, suddenly sat bolt upright as if he strayed deep been electrocuted. His storm-gray eyes, which had been locked on the projection screen, now swiveled to Ralph. They were wide with utter disbelief, which in a terrifying instant morphed into a glacial, dawning comprehension. His nostrils flared, an involuntary, primal reaction as he took in the rich, intoxicatingly sweet scent that was now saturating the conference room. It was unmistakably, unequivocally Omega, and it was pouring out of the one man he had considered his indispensable right hand, the man he had trusted implicitly above all others. The silence that descended was absolute, a crushing void broken only by the frantic, panicked drumming of Ralph's own heart against his ribs. A hot, crimson flush of shame and terror climbed his neck and consumed his face. He felt utterly exposed, stripped bare before his peers, his carefully constructed world not just crumbling, but imploding around him. He saw the betrayal harden Joe's features into a mask of cold, unforgiving fury. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. His career wasn't a strayed just in jeopardy. He had just made himself enemy number one to Joe Summers. When Eurostrade's voice finally broke the silence, it was a dangerously low whisper, a sound more lethal than any shout, that sliced through the tension like a scalpel. Ralph. The name wasn't a question. It was an indictment, a single word laced with so much venom that it made Ralph physically flinch. I believe, Joe continued, his voice lethally soft, we have a clause in our contracts. The room erupted in a low buzz of suppressed whispers. The other alphas present shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their gazes now openly hostile, their primal instincts inflamed by the sudden, untethered Omega scent in their midst. Ralph swallowed against a throat that had gone bone dry. His eyes locked with Joe's, and in those arctic gray depths he saw more than just anger. He saw a profound, almost agonizing sense of personal betrayal. The long con was over. The game was up. The rest of the meeting disintegrated into managed chaos. Joe, his face a chilling mask of controlled rage, immediately and unilaterally adjourned the session, his voice clipped and final. The board members, visibly unsettled, scattered like startled birds, their hushed whispers trailing behind them like departing ghosts. In the end, only Joe remained, his gaze still locked on Ralph, who stood frozen in place, his body still trembling with the aftershocks of his catastrophic scent flare. My office. Now, Joe's voice was a flat, emotionless dead tone, a terrifying contrast to the raw, undiluted fury that was now radiating off him in palpable waves. Ralph followed him, each step feeling as if his shoes were filled with lead. A bottomless despair settled over him. 3 years of meticulous, exhausting deception, obliterated in a single, careless moment. The walk from the conference room to Eurostrade's office, a path he had trod 1,000 times, now felt like a final, grim march to his own execution. The air in Joe's private sanctuary, once a familiar and comforting space of shared productivity, now felt suffocating, charged with unspoken damnations. The slam of Joe's office door echoed like a gunshot, sealing them in an ominous silence. He spun around, his eyes burning into Ralph Eurostrade's, colder and harder than any winter gale. Explain, he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Explain how you, an Omega, managed to breach the single most fundamental clause of this companion Eurostrade's charter. Explain your 3 years of deception. Ralph Eurostrade's throat felt tight, constricted. He could still smell the phantom residue of his own scent, the humiliating, fragrant evidence of his grand lie. I needed the job, Mr. Summers, he began, his voice barely audible. I knew about the clause. I couldn't let it be a barrier. I am good at what I do. My work has always spoken for itself. A harsh, disbelieving laugh escaped Joe's lips. Good at what you do? You mean deceiving your CEO, lying to your colleagues day in and day out, infiltrating my senior management team under a complete and total fabrication. He advanced a step, his alpha scent becoming an overwhelming, suffocating blanket of rage and betrayal. Do you have any comprehension of what this means? The position you have put me in. I never intended any harm, Ralph pleaded, his hands clenching into tight, white-knuckled fists at his sides. My only intention was to prove my worth. My secondary gender has absolutely no bearing on my professional capabilities. I use suppressants. I manage my heats meticulously, or Euros manage your heats. Joe cut him off, his voice rising, a tremor of pure, unadulterated rage vibrating through it. You just had a scent flare, Ralph. In front of the entire board of directors. In front of me, you have endangered not just my personal reputation, but the very stability of this corporation with your deceit. Ralph flinched as if struck. It was an accident, a horrible accident. I forgot my medication this morning. I swear on my life, it has never happened before. An accident, Joe scoffed, his face twisting into a mask of pure disgust. You expect me to believe that? You, the most meticulous, detail-oriented person I have ever met. You circumflex forgo to trade your medication on the single most important day of the fiscal year. Or was this something more calculated? Was this a deliberate move, a way to expose yourself, to gain some kind of leverage? No, Ralph cried out, genuinely horrified by the vile accusation. Never. I value this company more than anything. I value the work we do, and I respect you, Mr. Summers. Trade's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. Respect? You have shown me the highest order of disrespect. You manipulated your way into my inner circle. You lied to my face for 3 years. And for what, Ralph? Tell me, what is your endgame? The sheer weight of Trade's accusations, the terrifying depth of his anger, finally began to sink in. Ralph saw the hurricane raging in Trade's eyes, a profound sense of betrayal that clearly went far beyond a simple breach of contract. It was deeper, more personal. He could see the bitterness, the old pain that his own mistake had unwittingly reawakened. I have no end game, Ralph said, his voice now quiet, but firm with a desperate sincerity. I just wanted to do good work in a place that mattered. I wanted to be here. I never, ever meant to cause you, or this company, any pain. Joe turned away abruptly, raking a hand through his dark hair in a gesture of profound exasperation that Ralph had rarely, if ever, witnessed. Get out, he said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. Get out of my office. Get out of my company. Your termination is effective immediately. A cold, sickening dread spread through Ralph Trade's veins. You can't Trade just fire me. I have a contract. My performance record is impeccable. Your performance is utterly irrelevant when it is built upon a foundation of lies. Joe snarled, spinning back to face him, his face now inches from Ralph Trade's. The raw, overpowering intensity of his alpha presence was almost physically painful. You lied about your fundamental biology. That is a breach of trust so profound, so absolute. that it negates every good thing you have ever done here. I will personally see to it that you never work in this industry again." Ralph stared at him, stunned into silence. The threat was not an empty one. Joe Summers had the power, the influence, and now the motivation to completely destroy him. But it was the look in Eurostrade's eyes, the sheer, unadulterated hatred mixed with something that looked terrifyingly like wounded, agonizing pain, that truly shattered Ralph. He knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that this was never just about a corporate clause. It was about something far more personal, a ghost from Eurostrade's past. "You are Eurostrade reprojecting," Ralph whispered, the words escaping him almost unconsciously. "You aren't a Eurostrade seeing me. You are Eurostrade re-seeing someone else." Joe recoiled as if he had been slapped. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. "Don't Eurostrade you dare," he hissed, his voice trembling with a barely suppressed fury. "Don't Eurostrade you dare suggest I am anything less than perfectly rational. You are a liar, an omegaverse who thinks he can manipulate and deceive his way into a position of power, and I will not stand for it. Not again." The final two words hung in the air between them, a stunning revelation and a horrifying confirmation. Not again. Ralph Eurostrade's mind reeled. So it was true. There had been another, an omegaverse who had broken Joe Summers, and Ralph, through his own catastrophic blunder, had just become the living, breathing embodiment of that past trauma. "I Eurostrade am not him," Ralph said, his voice laced with desperation. "Or her. I don't Eurostrade even know who it is. But I swear to you, Mr. Summers, I am nothing like whoever it was that hurt you." Joe just stared, his gaze chillingly vacant, as if he was looking right through him. "Get out." There was no point in arguing. The verdict had been delivered. He had accidentally stumbled upon a nerve so raw, so deeply infected, that Joe was beyond the reach of reason or logic. Ralph turned and walked out of the office, the door clicking softly shut behind him, the sound of his entire world ending. The corporate war had officially begun, ignited by a single forgotten pill and a scent that had ripped open wounds a decade old. The ensuing days devolved into a frantic blur of legal threats and strategic countermeasures. Joe moved with the surgical precision of a seasoned general, initiating termination proceedings that cited gross misconduct and breach of contractual terms regarding undisclosed fundamental personal information. His legal team was a pack of sharks, formidable and relentless. But Ralph was not going to be devoured without a fight. He had poured 3 years of his life, his heart, his very soul into Summers Corp. He had built entire departments from the ground up, conceived of campaigns that had generated millions in revenue. He knew the company's strengths and, more importantly, its weaknesses from the inside out. He retained his own legal counsel, a sharp, no-nonsense beater who specialized in high-stakes employment law. "They'll hammer on the omegaverse clause," she stated calmly, her eyes scanning his contract. "But the very ambiguity of fundamental personal information is our opening. It's legally challengeable. And your performance record here isn't just good, it's extraordinary. We can build a powerful case for unfair dismissal based on secondary gender discrimination." Ralph found himself waging war against Joe on a new and unfamiliar battlefield, the legal arena. He leveraged his intimate knowledge of Summers Corp's internal structures to anticipate Joe's every move. He began a careful campaign of his own, leaking strategically chosen, and legally permissible tidbits of information to key industry journalists about Eurotrade's anachronistic and potentially discriminatory clause, subtly painting a picture of a company on the verge of a public relations nightmare. It was a high-risk, high-reward gambit, but with his career on the line, he had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, Joe derived a cold, grim satisfaction from watching his lawyers systematically attempt to dismantle Ralph Eurotrade's case. Yet, beneath the surface of his righteous fury, a gnawing unease began to take root. The shock of the betrayal, the audacity of the deception, had stirred up a hornet's nest of memories he had spent a decade burying. The image of Ralph Eurotrade's flushed, panicked face, the memory of his sweet, desperate omega scent, had torn open the old wound with brutal efficiency. He allowed himself to think her name, a name he rarely even permitted to cross his own mind, as Sarah, an omega with eyes the color of emeralds and a smile that could coax secrets from the stars. She had swept into his life 10 years ago, when Summers Corp was just a fledgling tech startup, the product of his blood, sweat, and dreams. She was a brilliant software engineer, a true visionary with a preternatural gift for transforming complex algorithms into elegant, user-friendly solutions. Joe, then a younger, more idealistic alpha, had been utterly captivated. He had ignored the subtle prejudices of society, dismissed the cautious s of his mentors, and had fallen completely and irrevocably in love. Their connection had been a whirlwind, intense and all-consuming. He had given her everything: his unconditional trust, his unprotected heart, and the keys to his companion Eurotrade's most heavily guarded intellectual property. He had championed her, defended her against the skeptical whispers of his own board. He had funneled all of Summers Corp's limited resources into her passion project, a revolutionary AI operating system that he believed would fundamentally change the world. Then came the night before the big investor pitch, the grand unveiling of their life's work. He had walked into the lab, his senses met with the conflicting sense of her recent triumph and her lingering fear, only to find the servers wiped clean. The schematics were gone, and Sarah was gone with them. She had stolen everything. The entire AI project, the culmination of years of relentless work, had vanished, and she had sold it in its entirety to their most ruthless competitor. The fallout had been apocalyptic. Summers Corp had been pushed to the very brink of bankruptcy. Eurotrade's reputation was left in tatters. He was painted as a naive, foolish alpha who had allowed his baser instincts to be manipulated by a treacherous omega. The shame, the raw, aching agony of that betrayal had nearly destroyed him. He had clawed his way back from the abyss, rebuilding Summers Corp from the ashes, brick by agonizing brick. But the experience had hollowed him out, leaving him cold, cynical, and pathologically distrustful. He had sworn an oath to himself that no omega would ever again be allowed to hold a position of power or his trust within his company. The omega clause was his armor, his fortress against ever feeling that kind of soul-crushing pain again. And now there was Ralph, another brilliant omega, another deceptive face, another sweet scent masking a potentially poisonous intent. Joe saw Sarah Eurotrade's ghost in every line of Ralph Eurotrade's legal resistance, in every calm attempt to justify his unforgivable actions. The bitterness of the past was a familiar, caustic taste in his mouth, a constant and unwelcome companion. He would sit in his office late at night, poring over legal documents, but his mind would inevitably drift back to Ralph. The way his eyes would sparkle with intellectual fire when he presented a new idea, The subtle, pleased curve of his smile when a complex campaign succeeded beyond all expectations. The quiet, unyielding determination that had propelled him up the corporate ladder. How could such genuine brilliance coexist with such fundamental, insidious deceit? Ralph, fighting for his professional survival, also began to dig deeper. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He needed to understand the source of Eurostrade's inexplicable, almost biblical rage. The phrase "not again" had lodged itself in his mind. He discreetly reached out to older, long-term employees, patiently piecing together fragments of hushed whispers and half-forgotten stories about a spectacular betrayal from the company's early days. A ruined project, and an Omega who had vanished into thin air. The full narrative was shrouded in corporate secrecy and old NDAs, but the central theme was painfully clear. Joe Summers had been burned, and burned badly, by an Omega. The realization struck Ralph not with triumph, but with a quiet, sympathetic ache. Joe wasn't Eurostrade just angry at him. He was terrified. Terrified of being hurt again. Terrified of another catastrophic betrayal. Ralph was simply a convenient, modern-day effigy for that deep-seated fear, a mirror reflecting a profoundly painful past. It didn't excuse Eurostrade's brutal actions, but it explained the sheer, unadulterated venom behind them. And paradoxically, this new understanding of Eurostrade's pain only made the strange, forbidden attraction that simmered between them feel even more potent. A desperate yearning for connection in the midst of a raging storm of animosity. The corporate war escalated. Ralph Eurostrade's lawyer officially filed a discrimination suit accusing Summers Corp of violating federal labor laws based on secondary gender. The press, smelling blood in the water, caught wind of the story, and suddenly the Omega clause was under intense public scrutiny. Joe, a man who guarded his privacy with a fierce jealousy, found himself caught in the unwelcome glare of the media spotlight. His carefully cultivated image as a visionary and ruthless but fair CEO now being tarnished by accusations of bigotry and prejudice. Joe retaliated by attempting to freeze Ralph Eurostrade's assets, making the audacious and legally dubious claim of corporate theft of intellectual property. It was a desperate, brutal move designed to financially incapacitate his opponent. Ralph, however, had foreseen Eurostrade's ruthlessness. He had anticipated such a move and had already secured his funds in an untouchable account. The battle was no longer just being fought in courtrooms, it had become a war of psychological attrition. Eurostrade's alpha presence, once a source of inspiration, now cast a suffocating pall over the entire office. His temper became volatile, his commands sharper, his distrust a palpable poison in the air. Employees walked on eggshells. The productivity and morale of Summers Corp, ironically, began to plummet under the strain of its Eurostrade's all-consuming personal vendetta. Ralph, despite the immense, crushing pressure, maintained an outward veneer of calm. He was fighting for his future, yes, but he was also fighting for something more elusive. He was fighting for Joe to see him, to truly see him, beyond the long, dark shadow of a ghost from his past. He couldn't shake the confusing, illogical pull he still felt towards the formidable Alpha, even as that same Alpha was actively trying to destroy him. It was a desperate, irrational yearning for acceptance from the one man who despised him most. The climax was inevitable, a collision course that had been set the very moment Ralph Eurostrade's scent had filled that boardroom. It arrived not in the form of a legal ruling, but as a hostile takeover bid. The aggressor wasn't a known rival, but a shadowy investment firm renowned for its ruthless tactics and its uncanny ability to exploit corporate vulnerabilities. The firm was named Pantheon Acquisitions, and its enigmatic head was a reclusive, whip-smart alpha named Elias Thorne. Thorne had seen the headlines. He strayed read about Summers Corp's internal turmoil, the Omega Clause controversy, and the ugly legal battle with a brilliant former executive. He recognized a weakness, a fatal crack in Joe Summers's impenetrable armor. He launched a public bid, offering a hostile, below-market price for Summers Corp shares, betting that trade's distraction and the impending PR catastrophe would force the board into a quick, desperate sale. Joe was completely blindsided. He had been so obsessively focused on his war with Ralph that he had failed to see the true predator circling his empire. The board was in an uproar, demanding answers and a strategy. Summers Corp trade's stock began to nosedive. Ralph, despite being locked in a bitter legal struggle for his own survival, still had residual access to his old Summers Corp email and internal communication archives from his time there. He saw the panicked internal memos, the frantic, desperate discussions about Pantheon acquisitions. A cold, heavy dread settled in the pit of his stomach. If Summers Corp fell, he wouldn't just lose his lawsuit, the company he had helped build, the place where he had poured 3 years of his passion and brilliance, would be dismantled. And Joe, for all his monstrous flaws and cruelty, didn't deserve to lose everything he had bled for. Driven by a complex cocktail of lingering professional loyalty, a strange empathy for trade's suddenly vulnerable position, and the undeniable, illogical pull he still felt towards the alpha, Ralph began to dig. He unleashed his marketing genius, his innate ability to spot patterns and hidden trends, to analyze Pantheon acquisitions. He delved deep into their history of hostile takeovers, their opaque financial structures, their shadowy leadership. What he uncovered sent a chill down his spine. Pantheon acquisitions had a distinct, predatory pattern, and they targeted companies already weakened by internal strife, with a particular focus on those with a history of intellectual property theft or corporate espionage. Their tactics were designed to destabilize, to create chaos, and then to acquire the weakened company for pennies on the dollar. Ralph trade's blood ran cold when he discovered a subtle, almost invisible thread connecting Pantheon acquisitions to a decade-old tech company that had imploded and vanished after a major IP theft, the very same theft that had almost destroyed Joe Summers. And the brilliant, disgraced CEO of that vanished company, her name was Sarah. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a long con, a decade in the making. Sarah hadn't just stolen trade's technology. She had used it as the foundation to build a new, shadowy empire, hidden behind a labyrinthine network of shell companies, with Pantheon acquisitions as her latest and most aggressive weapon. She hadn't just betrayed Joe all those years ago. She had systematically destroyed his original dream, and was now returning, like a vengeful ghost, to claim the empire he had built from its ashes. Ralph knew he had to act. He also knew Joe would never believe him. Not now, not from the Omega he had come to view as his mortal enemy. But the stakes were too high. Summers Corp, everything Joe had rebuilt, was on the verge of being annihilated. And perhaps, in a deep, hidden part of himself, Ralph still desperately craved trade's trust, his belief. He worked through the night, drafting a concise, data-driven report. He meticulously outlined Sarah Eurostrade's deep involvement with Pantheon acquisitions, the clear pattern of their takeovers, and the undeniable intent to not just acquire, but to destroy Summers Corp. He included irrefutable financial trails, leaked internal documents Eurostrade unearthed, and historical data that painted a damning picture. He sent the completed report to Joe's personal, unlisted email address. Then, with a trembling hand, he called Eurostrade's private line. Joe, besieged on all fronts by the takeover bid, answered, his voice hoarse with stress and exhaustion. "What do you want, Ralph? Haven't Eurostrade you done enough damage?" "Joe," Ralph said, the use of his first name feeling both shockingly intimate and strangely right amidst the chaos. "Listen to me. You have to listen. Pantheon Acquisitions isn't Eurostrade just some hostile bidder. Eater Eurostrade's Sarah. She Eurostrade's coming for everything you have." There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, a low, guttural growl. "You manipulative bastard. This is another one of your games, isn't Eurostrade it? Trying to throw me off balance, to disturb me with my own board? Is this part of your grand legal strategy, to make me look insane?" "No," Ralph shouted, his own voice cracking with a desperate urgency. "Check your email. Eurostrade sent you the proof. She stole your AI tech 10 years ago, and she Eurostrade's leveraged it to build this entire network. She Eurostrade's coming back to finish what she started. This isn't Eurostrade about me anymore. This is about her wanting to destroy everything you are Eurostrade ever built, brick by brick." Joe hung up the phone. Ralph waited, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he had either just saved Summers Corp or had irrevocably sealed his own doom. An hour later, an hour that felt like a lifetime, Joe called back. His voice was completely different. The anger was gone, replaced by a strained, raw tone of disbelief and dawning horror. "Ralph the reporter the evidence you sent to He trailed off, his breath catching in his throat. "It carna Eurostrade TB. She Eurostrade she Eurostrade's been gone for a decade. She Eurostrade's been building," Ralph countered, his voice steady and firm. "She Eurostrade's methodical. She Eurostrade's patient. And she hates you." Joe was silent for a long, heavy moment. Ralph could almost feel the weight of his realization pressing down through the phone line, the agonizing, seismic unraveling of a decade of carefully constructed bitterness and rage. How did you find all of this?" "I know how she thinks," Ralph said, a weary truth resonating in his voice. "I understand the patterns. I can see the long game, because Tharter Eurostrade's what I do. Eater Eurostrade's what I always did for you." A profound, fundamental shift occurred within Joe in that instant. The towering walls of rage and betrayal he had built around his heart began to crack and crumble. He had accused Ralph of being a manipulator, a liar, a carbon copy of his greatest enemy. But here was Ralph, putting his own neck on the line, offering him a lifeline when he had every reason in the world to stand back and watch Summers Corp burn to the ground. And the proof was undeniable. Sarah, the ghost he had tried so hard to bury, was real, and she was back. And Ralph, the Omega he had reviled and tried to destroy, was the only one holding the torch that could light the way through the darkness. "Come to my office," Joe said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its former accusations. Now, Ralph arrived moments later, his body still coiled with tension. unsure if he was walking into an ambush or an armistice. Joe was standing by the panoramic window, staring out at the city skyline, his broad shoulders slumped in a way Ralph had never seen before. The air was thick with a new kind of tension, not of anger, but of profound, world-altering shock. He turned as Ralph entered the room. His eyes, though still guarded, held a flicker of something Ralph had never witnessed there before: raw vulnerability. I was wrong, Joe said, his voice rough with emotion. About you. About everything. Ralph said nothing, simply waiting, letting the words hang in the space between them. Sir, Joe continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. She was the first the only Omega I ever truly bonded with. She stole the AI project. She nearly ruined me. She destroyed my ability to trust. And I trade V being projecting that pain, that poison, onto every Omega trade V encountered since. Especially you. He took a shaky, ragged breath. I convinced myself you were just like her. Another manipulator, another liar. I was so blinded by my own bitterness that I couldn't see the truth right in front of my face. Ralph felt a strange, conflicting wave of vindication and pity wash over him. The confession hung in the air, a heavy, unspoken apology that carried the weight of years of pain. Why, Ralph? Joe asked, finally looking at him directly, his stone gray eyes filled with a desperate, agonizing question. After everything trade V done to you, after trying to ruin your Euros, why would you help me? So, what do you think? After being betrayed, fired, and publicly humiliated, would you have done what Ralph did? Would you have saved the man who tried to destroy you? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. This story is just getting started, and the tension is only going to get thicker from here. If you were captivated by Ralph and trade's story and need to know what happens next, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. Your support means the world, and it ensures we can keep bringing these incredible stories to life. We Trade LL see you in the next video.